let's dive into another topic that I know that you're passionate about. If you look at penalties, you have been doing large data sets of that. Can you just take us to the penalty shootout with England this year and explain the data set you had going into that tournament, and also explain what happened at the penalty shootout?
Yeah, so I can probably speak about England for a few hours and penalties. And of course, I have to start by saying that again, I mean, coming from Norway, there's something really wrong about talking about other countries' penalties because, well, at least with our men's team, we never get to penalty shootouts. We never even get to tournaments, so we never get to take part in, where this could be a case. But with England, they have, of course, a very complicated history with penalties, with a large period of time, well, decades, where they wouldn't win anything when it comes to penalties. They would have great teams, get far in tournaments, but then they're kicked out on penalties. And then Southgate and his team did really decided that we're going to do something about this ahead of the 2018 World Cup. So they had a team of, I think, 3 or 4 people that worked for 5 or 6 months, exclusively dedicated to how can we solve this penalty puzzle for England. So they collected all the research they could get their hands on. They spoke to researchers. They had meetings with psychologists, with referees. They had workshops with staff. They had workshops with players. Anything that they could control in this event, they controlled. Went into a penalty shootout against Colombia in the World Cup. They win. I'm looking at this and I'm like, it ticks all the boxes of things that you want the team to do. It's a great display. And you kind of think, okay, so maybe this penalty issue has now been resolved for England. Now, fast forward 3 years, we get to a shootout again in the final of the Euros this summer. And I haven't been involved in any way with them. I was consulted 3 years back, so I spoke with them then, but I have not, heard anything now since then. And I'm looking at what happens, and I see an England team or management that follows some of the principles involved or some of the things that we find from research they seem to follow, but they don't apply it in the comprehensive way that I would advise. They don't use this into they don't manage risk as you should going into this type of event. For example, we find in our research that there's nothing wrong with putting young players into a penalty shootout. And there's nothing wrong with putting substitutes in to take a penalty in a penalty shootout. In fact, both young players and substitutes statistically or historically score a little bit more than older players and non-substitutes, the ones that have played 120 minutes before they take shots. So then, it would be fine then to put Saka and Sancho and Rashford to take penalties, who of course famously missed in this shootout. Now the problem is, how do you apply this type of knowledge? And if you look at these 3 players, these were players who were not regulars in the tournament. They didn't play that much. So that's first of all. When you get to a shootout, you want players who have confidence, of course, who have a good feeling that they feel a part of the squad, a part of the group. Now, they may very well, of course, feel those things, but we know that they did not get a chance to really play themselves warm into this tournament. And what's worse is that 2 of these players, as we know, were substituted on right before the end of extra time. And then you have 2 players who have not played in the tournament. So basically, their team took them to the final. And now it's up to the 2 of them to make sure that the rest of the team gets their reward of winning this game. And also what's worse is that the rest of the team took them to the 120th minute and the penalty shootout. And now it's up to those 2 that the rest of the team gets the reward in this event. And that's adding a lot of pressure onto players that also are young. And this combined, I think, it's not how this data that we have going into this would prescribe that you would do. And it's an example of how you need to look at a little bit more the holistic part of this event to assess risk before you make decisions about it.
That's super interesting. I mean, it just also shows that you can use good data in a bad way and vice versa, right? So it's very complicated that you can sort of understand something, but you can also misuse that understanding.